Hi, this week we are going to be talking about the 4 qualities of Greek medicine as it pertains, well, just to herbal medicine in general and Western herbal medicine. The interesting thing, I think this is kind of the groundwork for understanding how plants work. So plants have qualities to them, and in some ways like temperatures, but qualities. So in the 4 qualities model, they have hot, cold, damp, and dry. We could add in later in the history of in herbal medicine is antispasmodic, which is a totally different action. But the 4 qualities are very simple because how herbal medicine was developed was by taste. And you could tell what an herb was going to do and the action of the herb by tasting, because our tongues actually are, not everyone's, but most tongues are very good at tasting what chemicals are in a plant. And that's a protective mechanism because a lot of poisons are bitter. And so a lot of people tend to not like the bitter taste. But some plants that have alkaloids in them have really strong bitter tastes and make people want to gag. But a lot of bitter plants have a lot of help to do. So we're going to talk about the 4 qualities. So hot, cold, damp, and dry, and perceiving that. So we can imagine with ginger root, when you take a slice off, and that is one of the activities you could do, is just sit with it, that you are going to taste hot. You have the pungency of ginger root, and that has something it tells us about its action on us. So it's going to warm the body. It is going to move the blood. And one of the great things about ginger is, we're not thinking about now in summer here, but in wintertime, if you take dried ginger and put it in your mittens, the blood will constantly be moving to your fingertips, and you won't have cold hands or cold feet if you put it in your socks. So ginger has that heat, that warming quality. Now the Greeks got more specific, and they had plants that were hot in the 1st degree, 2nd degree, 3rd degree, and 4th degree. Ginger is hot in the 3rd degree because it can irritate the skin. Now hot in the 4th degree is when it actually burns the skin, and those were called ascortics, and those were used to burn off growths on the skin, and actually bloodroot is one of those. But another really famous herb, actually from Egyptian medicine on, this is written about in the papyri from Egyptian medicine, is garlic, which is also hot. And we can see the action of garlic's heat. If we were to chew a bulb, it would feel hot. Now it's a different kind of heat than ginger, but it has, because of its chemicals that are in it, and there's just different chemicals in both of them. Now garlic's heat and ginger's heat both can kill microorganisms. So garlic is antifungal, it's antibacterial, it's antiviral. A lot of people at the first sign of a cold or flu will take garlic or ginger as just basic first signs, and it actually fights off infections. So strong heat fights off infection, gets the blood moving, and helps us with colds and flus or other types of infections. So those are the heat plants. And the taste of them is called pungency. Now, plants are often either hot and dry or hot and damp. And garlic happens to be a hot and dry herb, so it will, eventually kind of dry out the mouth while the heat is there. So every plant has its own specifics with it. Another plant in a different category is a drying plant, and I have this drawing, and this is sumac, and we can look at the plant too. But this is sumacs, and I collect the berries, and the berries are collected on very dry days because there's more malic acid and tannins in it on dry days. So I usually wait until it hasn't rained for a week. The berries start coming out late July, And you'll probably see these. They're even standing on the tree in the winter. And it's an astringent plant, which means if I put a berry in my mouth, it's going to dry up my mouth, so it'll be hard for me to talk. So I probably shouldn't do that. But and you can feel like the tightness in the mouth. Many of these astringents that are berries or fruits are also sour, which shows that they are cooling and drying. The tannins in plants are what are astringent. And what we're talking about when we say a dry plant, it's not just that like you put it on the skin and it dries out your skin. What dry plants do is they hold moisture in. And so whether it be, this is a really great remedy for people when their nose is running, or they're sweating too much, or they're peeing too much, and they're just losing fluids. And so if we think about a dry plant, if I pour water onto my table, it's going to go everywhere. And a dry plant is basically like a glass. And if I pour water into this glass, it's going to hold the water. And so that's how I think about the astringent plants. They hold things in. And so even if someone has dry skin, it will hold the moisture inside the skin. And that's why we use like witch hazel and other like astringent tightening hydrosols on our skin, even if we have dry skin, because it creates a barrier and holds moisture in, so you're not losing excess moisture. For people that are dry, it sometimes can be too drying to take drying plants, but the astringency is what's important. Tannins are only released in hot water. So if I were to make a cool tea of this, or just put it in cool water, I won't get all of the astringency that's in the plant. So for teas and things like that, you use hot water. And tannins seep out. And so if you have black tea, which is a very astringent plant, it gets more and more tannins in it the longer that you leave your tea bag in hot water. So a lot of people like to pull it out because it becomes too drying to drink the black tea. So that is how all these tannin-rich plants work. Sumac is also anti-inflammatory. It can bring down inflammation in the throat, inflammation on the skin, and that's the sour flavor in there. It has anti-inflammatory properties to it. So here are sumac berries. This one is staghorn sumac, and it has these fuzzy stems on it. This is my favorite sumac. I just love the fuzzy stems. But here are the berries. The bark of sumac can be used as well. So I harvest the bark either fall or late fall or early spring. And that is also a wonderful tincture. And you can mix the bark and the berries together to have a fabulous, beautiful red tincture. And people will notice these all over the place. They're native here, and you'll notice them because in the fall they turn bright red. So they're just a wonderful, wonderful plant, and they do spread throughout a yard. So you'll find them popping up all over if you put them in your yard, just like I am with these little baby sumacs, and every year more babies. Another plant, and that's blooming right now in late August, is a favorite of pollinators. And we can just see the bee activities and the wasps and the bees and just all of the flying insects and the flies. Everyone loves goldenrod, Solidago canadensis. So this is an herb you will spot. And I know if you live in Minneapolis, right now at the Walker Arts Center, their whole sculpture garden is basically a sea of Canada goldenrod. It's a rather invasive species in a way. It will take over land that was, if someone stopped plowing it, that and the thistles. And Canada goldenrod, this is the time to harvest it. And it's I usually harvest the whole plant from here with the flower on it. This is when I like to harvest it. But we're not going to talk about the uses necessarily, but one of the things, if you find this, because I think you can easily, and it's not in any place that has spray or along a railroad track or road, you can taste it, and you will get that bitter flavor. And it should be bitter. It tastes a little floral to a little cleansing, but it's the bitter flavor that makes us pucker up. So it's not as bitter as some plants are, but bitter is cooling and drying. And so that taste is a cool and dry action. So, like I said, all plants usually have 2 of the 4 qualities. I add in the 5th quality of antispasmodic. But as we go on and we taste the herbs, and this is safe to taste, this is how we understand how the chemicals work. And these cooling and drying bitters actually first, through the taste of the bitter taste, work on our vagus nerve and our digestion. And so Canada goldenrod was always a digestive aid. It has many other uses, and you can find out more about those, but it works on our digestion. The other thing that I want you to practice when I'll show you some of the bitter plants and tasting the bitter plants is that bitter plants, because they help our vagus nerve and they kind of turn our vagus nerve on right away, is they are relaxing. And many of our relaxant herbs that are antispasmodic and relax the mind are actually really bitter, and they help you focus, and they help your eyes actually see detail better, and they help your mind focus. So if we think about a lot of the anti-anxiety herbs or anxiolytics, we think about bitter herbs like skullcap, blue vervain, and all of those. So it's just like brings down the level of energy, and helps you to focus, gets your stomach going, and puts you in the parasympathetic mode. So a lot of those cool, dry herbs are used for both digestion, anxiety, and calming the spirit. This is boneset, and this is probably one of the most bitter herbs, and I will attempt to chew on it. You will see boneset, Eupatorium perfoliatum, along wetland areas. And it's called perfoliatum because it has, the stem goes right through the leaves, wraps around the leaves like this. And this is extremely bitter. Let's see if I can handle it. Extremely bitter. This one you should try if you find it. I don't know if you're going to be positive about your identification. Canada goldenrod's a little better. But this is bitter, and the more the bitter sits in the mouth, the more it breaks up and goes on your tongue with your bitter receptors on your tongue. And can really, really focus. What happens instantaneously when I take the boneset is my whole body kind of cools off, even though I'm standing in the sun. And so sometimes when I'm out harvesting or on a long walk or things like that, I just chew on a bitter herb just to kind of cool the whole system off. So bitter, let's see, bitter. So I don't have any of this in the yard. This is marshmallow root that I harvested and cut and dried, and I put it in my blender and chopped it up, and it smells like marshmallow root. But this is one of the most mucilaginous plants, and all of the plants in the mallow family or the Malvaceae family have a mucilage quality to them. And if I put this overnight in a cold infusion, I pour hot water over a tea, and then I put it in the refrigerator, and by morning it has so much mucilage it looks like spit. And this is the dampest, moistest plant in the Materia Medica. If you are looking for moisture and things are dry, whether it be topical or internal, marshmallow is your best bet. And this is one of the oldest plants from Western European medicine that was used for mucilaginous properties. We don't even know how long it's been used because it was probably in folk medicine prior to even Dioscorides writing about it. And there's also a famous story about Culpeper saving his son from emaciating from dysentery by giving marshmallow. And so this is cooling and cool and damp. And most damp herbs are cooling, because the second that we add moisture into the body, we're going to add water, we're going to cool things off. People, when they start to become more dry, are often, well, either they're going to move towards cold because everything becomes inactive, but they often don't handle heat well because they don't have enough fluid. So if you think about how important it is on a hot day or in the desert to keep hydrated, otherwise your body can't regulate itself. So most moist, damp plants are cooling in general, so cool and damp. And that's the two qualities that these have. And it gets rid of hot, dry conditions. So any type of dry cough or hot, dry skin inflammation that's really itchy, so psoriasis or things like that, topical, it can be used. It can only be used in tea form. The properties do not come out in alcohol. The other thing about it is that, so Culpeper always talks about it as he just really used it in the 18th century for anything that was hot and dry, and had a lot of experience with it. The opposite, the only plant that is a damp or moist and hot herb is fenugreek, which we know that has been used. It was in the Egyptian papyri. It's a very famous Islamic medicine. It was one of the herbs of the Prophet Muhammad and written about in the Quran. And it's so really famous herb, but it's really unique because it is both hot and damp, because it has mucilage, but then it has this pungency to it. So it's one of the very few herbs that I can think of that is really truly like hot and damp. Like it's kind of a unique one. There's probably more but just from my experience, that is probably the most mucilage you get out of something that's spicy. So if that's what you need, it's just a very, very unique herb. So it's weird to do a plant walk about the tastes and qualities for the four qualities with knowing that you're not tasting them right now. But hopefully when you have the opportunity to do so. So this is lemon balm here, and this is the seed heads here. It has a vine growing on it, which is a Chinese medicine I'm not going to talk about. But and lemon balm is in the Lamiaceae family, and many of the Lamiaceae family plants are very high in volatile oils. And lemon balm just smells, it has that lemon smell to it. One thing we know about lemon balm, and not all plants that are high in essential oils are cooling, and so there's a few that are. So yarrow can be cooling, lemon balm can be cooling, peppermint can be cooling, but a lot of the herbs high in essential oils aren't all cooling. And lemon balm cools off the body and cools off, and it can prevent from heat stroke even. So it has a lot of properties to it. I primarily use it for a lot of antiviral activity and calming, cooling off the mind. And it's a great remedy for children who maybe are outside all day, they're a little bit overexcited, they can get overheated. But it's one of my favorite herbs in the evening or during the day to kind of refocus and calm the mind. But it is considered cooling. Now, all of these herbs high in essential oils that have scents to them when we touch them also have bitter qualities to them. So if we were to get rid of that lemon taste or have that sit in our mouth for a while, we would start to get the bitter flavor. So this is cool and dry. So really good for children because children tend to be hot and damp. So a cool, dry herb is a perfect choice for them. Here we have agrimony, Agrimonia grypocephala. This is the species native to North America. The species native to Europe is Agramonia eupatoria. So you'll see that name more commonly in books, but you can use this species here that is native here. Right now, the flower, it has one more flower left, but it is mostly full of burrs, and my cat has been traveling these burrs right inside our house. So there's lots around my house because obviously she's been rubbing up against it and all the burrs are gone, and on the children. So fun for the whole family. And this is considered an astringent plant. So this is a drying plant. And what's interesting about Agramone, well, it's part of the rose family. So the rose family, all of the plants have a cooling astringent property to them. And they're really mild as far as their effect on the body, but they're very strong. And this was in many European battles. This was carried for a wound herb to pull together and stop the bleeding and pull together a wound. And what's interesting about this particular plant, I don't want to probably talk too much about this because I talk about this plant so much. What's interesting is that in European, what we know about the writings in that, the whole plant was used in flour. And that's the part that was used on the battlefields. And they don't really talk a lot about other properties for Agramone. Now, when we look at ethnobotanical data, it is stated that tribes throughout North America actually collected and used the burrs for medicine. And so they were storing these, and they primarily used it for what they called summer sickness, which meant that the water or food sources were compromised and children were having diarrhea, and so they especially used it with children. And so astringents are often plants used for diarrhea and dysentery, and so the burrs were used as a strong astringent. Now it's easier to dry the burrs, or we can think of it as the seeds, and store them but it's kind of interesting. And it would be like this time of year that children, as it really is warm for a long time, and the water maybe hosts more E. coli or other bacterias, the summer illness or summer sickness would happen. But Agramone has that astringent quality, so it can stop bleeding, it can stop infectious diarrhea, and things like that. But what's interesting about it, though, is it's also a really fantastic antispasmodic, and it has an antispasmodic quality, and it stops pain through spasmodic pain. And so in the 19th century, it was seen more as a kidney remedy, and used for pain in the kidneys and sharp shooting pains. And this is my favorite remedy for the pain, for the passage of a kidney stone, and it is fantastic, and I can't say enough about it. But again, this is a cooling and drying herb for a hot, damp condition. But it has so many other properties to it, and you will hear me probably talk at length in the future about my love for Agramone. This is, another pungent, spicy plant. I still have like lemon balm in the back of my throat. But just thinking about eating this one is making me do it. Now this is Monarda fistiosa, or bee balm. And this is pungent and spicy. Now what's interesting is this time of year, it gets filled up with watery mildew, and it turns white, but it's still good to harvest it. The mildew actually doesn't cause any problem with drying it, and some folks prefer it with it. And when you take a bite out of this plant, this is the flower, these are the seeds. The flowers start blooming around the 4th of July in Minnesota, but it is so hot, it starts burning your whole mouth. But it's in the Lamiaceae family, so what's really fascinating about Monarda, as hot as it is, this herb will cool you down. And so it has that pungent quality, but it's actually cooling, and it can be used topically. So if I had a sunburn, I could take the spit from the leaf and rub it on, and it would take down the pain of a sunburn. It would take down the pain up until a 2nd degree burn from a fire. And it is burning my mouth still, but it's actually going to have a diaphoretic action where it moves the blood to the surface, and I'm going to cool off internally. So it's cooling in that way. But it also has a property where it's heating, because herbs that are heating like this, that have an instant spark, can fight against microorganisms such as viruses, bacteria, and this is a really great yeast remedy as well. So this is one of my favorite topical and internal yeast remedies, along with black walnut hull. So but just a fantastic plant. But that hot, you can taste that heat, but because it has these other properties, it also has cooling. So some plants have a bunch of different properties, which means they're just very versatile and they can be used for a lot of different applications. So if you're around Canada goldenrod, you might look for some Monarda to taste. And these buttons are the flower heads, and it should smell spicy, and it's called wild oregano because it smells a little bit like oregano, but it's way hotter to the taste than oregano. So if you know what Monarda looks like, taste it and just feel how it cools the body off. And my body was already pretty cool because I ate some bitter plants, but this just cooled it down to the next level. So I've had all these cooling herbs out in the sun. I've had lemon balm, Monarda, bone set, just the bitter things. So I'm feeling rather cooled off.